How's it going today, guys? Um, I'm starting a series on building resin models and pinning. After watching some YouTube videos right here lately, I've seen a disturbing trend when it comes down to resin models and YouTubers. I think a lot of these guys are not misleading you on purpose. I believe it's more of the fact that they've got money and are buying expensive models and don't have the hobby background to properly build the model. I watched a video about 3 weeks ago of a YouTuber that got a Stormbird from Forge World, and he just slapped it together with super glue, and it almost gave me a stroke. A model like that, and most of your Forge World models, you cannot just super glue together. You have to keep some things in mind when you're dealing with resin. First of all, yes, it is a plastic, but it is a different type of plastic. This is the heavy construct, the Necron heavy construct from Forge World. Now, when you get your model in, you need to wash it. I always wash mine in Dawn. I generally do the cleanup on it before I wash it because you're always going to have little bits, and you're going to be missing little bits here and there that you need to go back and trim, and you may want to wash them a second time. But you want to wash it with Dawn because of the mold release that is on these models. It's just the oily substance that helps remove the model from the mold. Now, these videos I will be doing unscripted because I treat this as just two buddies sitting down talking. And yes, I'm heavily Southern, and I do have a little bit of a speech impediment, so there'll be some words I cannot pronounce correctly, such as this model, the Necron Heavy Construct. But something you want to keep in mind with resin is you have five enemies when it comes down to resin, and that is time, temperature, humidity, gravity, and the resin itself. Those are the five enemies, and I won't go through them in any particular order. And the reason I tell you that they're your enemies, this material is very temperature sensitive. Something that Forge World is notorious about is their models are generally very top heavy. I will be doing a video on Reavers, Warlords, a Stormbird myself, and show you guys kind of what you need to do and what you need to keep in mind when building these models. Whenever you start looking at your model, you've got it in, and I know the idea is let's get it together, let's go play as quickly as we can. But that will haunt you. That will cause you a lot of trouble down the road because of those five things I mentioned beforehand. This model is not necessarily as top heavy, but these are its feet. Now, to give you an idea, here's just a Necron that I started working on. The edge of his foot is the same size as this Necron's head. That's what all his feet are, besides his front 2 feet. Here. But as you can see, the contact point's just about the same on these. And this is where pinning is a must. When you've got all this in mind and you start doing the construction. Now, I do mine much differently than most people. Most people like to just build the model and paint it after it's built. I don't do that because I'm more of a collector myself. I do play from time to time, but when I do mine on a scenic base also. So when you're putting these together, such as the spinal column right here, you want to pin it. And the reason why is this particular spine holds a lot of weight. All your models will have weight points. And what I mean by that is this particular construct this is the main body of the construct. Let's see. Okay, and this is the bottom end where your legs are going to be at. The head's over here. This right here is supporting the weight of your model. Now, the spinal column goes on it much like this, and there's little pieces that come out. And as you can see, these little pieces are very small, and they are also resin. They all need to be pinned. In the pinning process, when you're looking through your model, you've got to find these weight points where you know that it's going to carry most of the weight. And you have to do that because of the 5 reasons I mentioned before. Time, gravity, the material itself, all of them. They all will affect your model. And when you're doing this, you need to understand the type of player you are. Are you a collector? Are you somebody who goes from tournament to tournament? Do you play it a little bit and kind of mess around here and there, and maybe you take a break for a year or two? These models are very temperature sensitive. I know some guys, they store their models in the garage. That's a nightmare waiting to happen. You know, you take this model, I bought this one a long time ago when it first came out. I don't know what the price is. It's $300-400. But imagine you take this model, you take the time to put it together, you pin it, you do your scenic base, you store it in your garage, and you go back out there 6 months later, and it has completely failed. I mean, it's just laying over in a heap. Temperature will destroy these models. Now, if you pin these models properly, heat, temperature, humidity, and gravity is not that bad of an issue. And to pin the model, you don't have to start out running out and buying a bunch of equipment. And I know sometimes in these videos I'll ramble a little bit, but like I said, I treat this as just 2 buddies sitting down there talking. Because that's the way these videos should be. It shouldn't be to sell you anything. These videos are to share information with new people coming into the hobby. I may get off topic. Hey, it's just the way it goes. But we're going to get back to the pinning here. This one I've already drilled the hole in. Now, this is all you need. You don't have to run out and buy a drill. You don't have to run out and buy a cordless drill. They will help you. It'll make it a little quicker. You have to be a little more careful with power tools, though, because the idea is to go wham real quick, and then you've got this sticking out through your model, and you've got a mess to clean up. But when you're pinning your model, and I always use epoxy, 2-part epoxy. I do not use super glue unless it's an extremely small part. You want to drill into your model like this, and make sure, you know, kind of keep your finger out, and you see this way this spine curves. You don't want to go too deep. Generally, about that much. Maybe half an inch in this particular model. And this one I've already done the same. Now, if you'll notice, you'll say, well, okay, why, Warshak, why do you have 2 more holes here? This is, the middle hole is your main pin. These other 2 holes are actually there to give the epoxy something to grab a hold of. These models have kind of a, I don't want to say slick, but they're not really, they're more smooth, and it gives epoxy a little bit of a problem, and super glue also. You kind of have to rough it up a little bit to make sure your pins will hold. Maybe just come in and kind of nip it just a little bit, not much, but just nip it. And that will allow your epoxy something to grab a hold of. And the same thing on this end. Just nip it just a bit. Now, the general rule is that you always cut away from yourself, but, you know, like most hobbyists, you know, I've heard that time and time again, and I've also slice my fingers up quite a bit because I don't listen to my own advice sometimes. But this is how you want to do your penning. Now, as far as what you use as a pen, it really depends on you. Personally, I like electric fence wire, about 18 gauge. It's strong, it's flexible, but there's some other things you can use. If you are around a store called Harbor Freight, or even on Amazon, you can get this cheap little pack of drill bits. It comes in a variety of sizes. These drill bits are not worth the time to buy them if you're going to be trying to drill in wood or steel. They just won't last. But for the hobbyist, it's a very cheap option. Some of these pins, and I'll show you later on, maybe in another video, are extremely short for drill bits and make excellent pins. And I just lost one. Now, I am sorry about my hands. I live on a farm, and I had to work on a backhoe yesterday, so there's a little bit of fluid on my hands. But your pins, it's all up to you what you have available. You don't have to use steel. You don't have to use electric fence wire. In some cases, you can get away with using a toothpick. You can go to your local Walmart. You can get a box of finishing nails. If you do start moving into nails, finishing nails, you will need a set of cutters. This is an old set that I have had for probably 20 years. And you'll need these to cut this stuff when you start moving into steel, things like that. And your steel, when you get into your bigger constructs, your bigger models, I'm afraid you will have to invest into a Dremel because there's just no other way. But this is pretty much just an introduction to let you know what's going to be going on. My construction process is a little different than most people's because when I buy this model, to me, I paid good money for this. And I want to paint every single drop of it. I want to detail it as much as I possibly can. And when you do, you put that kind of work into this, you want to make sure it is pinned. And it is a stable model. You have to think about what you're going to do. And what I like to do is, as I'm cleaning it up, I like to do scenic bases. Now, your scenic base, you want to tell a story. And this all ties back into pinning. Because your scenic base is going to be your pinning point of where you're going to hold your model. If you're not in the scenic bases, you can still do the pinning process, but you're still going to have to figure out some way to make sure this model is supported well. Some people will do let me see if I've got a steel rod. A steel rod, something like this, that will go underneath the model and attach it to maybe a flying base or a wooden base or even one of these little small Games Workshop bases, just to kind of give it this would be cut off naturally, something to hold the weight. Now, as you're cleaning up, as I've said before, make sure you use Dawn. That's the thing I use, and the reason I use Dawn when I clean my models is I'm not sure how old you are, but I can remember the Exxon Valdez oil spill, and they used Dawn to get the oil off the birds. And if Dawn will take off unrefined oil off of a bird, you can sure well believe it will clean up your models. When you get your model in, you can do it one of two different ways before you start pinning. I like to trim up my model before I use Dawn and let it soak, because whenever you're trimming up your models, you're going to have little will-o-wisps, if you will. You're going to have little places where you trim it up and say, oh, there's this little fine little piece that maybe it's a piece of overcast, maybe it's something that you just didn't quite nip. But when you take your toothbrush and you go over this with Dawn, you won't have to worry about all the little squirrely bits. It'll come off. Like I said, this is just an introduction to why I'm doing these videos. And I apologize if I ramble. I just treat it like I'm talking to a normal person. I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm not here to push you for donations or anything like that. I'm doing this on a cell phone. So if the quality is not quite there, I apologize. But I've noticed a lot of these YouTubers, I don't know if they're chasing views. They don't have the hobby background they should. If it's just, look at this big expensive thing I've gotten. And they, I think, are not intentionally misleading you, but you're being misled. Most of us are not YouTubers. I'm certainly am not. And a model like this is a major investment. I understand there's a lot of people out there that they're not making a lot of money, and this may be a month's savings for you, maybe 5 months savings. I'm not sure. Maybe you sold something you really like to get it. And I want to make sure that you've got the skills and the understanding to properly assemble a model and make sure that in the long term, it's not going to crash and burn. And the reason I found this out the hard way, I own several Titans, and years ago I bought a Reaver. And when I put together the Reaver, I did not feel it was necessary to pin it. I just slapped it together with super glue. Well, a few years later, I was sitting at my computer desk, and I glanced over at my Chaos Reaver, and I noticed it was leaning a little bit. Well, I thought it was, and I said, "Well, maybe I did have it leaning that low. I'm not sure, but I didn't pay it any mind." And a few weeks later, I looked back over it, and I said, "Was it really leaning that far? It must have. I super glued it, and it's fine. It's no big deal." Well, about a week after that, I was sitting on my couch watching TV, and I heard a crash. And I walked into my hobby room, and the Reaver was laying on the floor in about 6 pieces. And I'll tell you a little secret, guys. That was a real, legitimate Reaver from Forge World. And that will break your heart. When you walk into a room and realize there's about $1,700 laying in the floor in pieces because of something that you should have done. And at that point in time, I knew I should have pinned it, but I didn't. So, as I've said before, I'm going to be doing this series of videos, and I'm going to try not to ramble as much, but, again, it's just two buddies talking. That's all this is. Just like if we were sitting at the hobby shop. And I don't really know the skills as far as editing and all that. I'll try to do better as I go. But much like any hobby, you start off with what you have. That's the reason I tell you, you don't necessarily need all the big expensive tools to start off with. I mean, this will do you just fine. Especially if you're not a collector, this is just your baby. You want to put it together and get to playing understandable. This is all you really need. And of course, the pins. And as I said before, as long as your pins, as long as it's harder than the material you're pinning, you're fine with it. My go-to again is electric fence wire. I also will use finishing nails, sometimes toothpicks you can use. Um, Sometimes you can use paper clips. But I will tell you, paper clips are a lot stronger than what you think they are. And that again is where this little clipping tool comes in. This thing right here will save you a lot of time. And like I said, I've had this thing for 25 years. Crescent Tool Company in Jamestown, New York. 726. Let's see, Crest Tool. I can't quite make it out. Something USA. Like I said, this thing's old, but it has served me well. And as we go through this process a little bit more, this is just more or less an introduction. Kind of get you into the understanding of what I'm going to be doing here. Now, some of the hobbyists will come in and say, you don't need all that. You shouldn't do all that. This is the thing. I understand you regular guys out there. Me and you are just alike. You put a lot of money into this model. And maybe it was a Christmas gift. Maybe it was, again, savings. Maybe you came into some money and bought it. But it's a massive investment. It's not something that you can just put together and throw out the window when you get tired of it. I want to make sure that you have a good understanding of what you're doing. In this first video, I didn't really show a whole lot because, again, introduction. But we will be going through the process. And my process is a little bit different than everybody else's. I paint everything in parts. Now, I will do some sub-assembly. This will probably be the first one that I do to kind of get you to understand the process of painting. One more thing to keep in mind with your Forge World models, I know they're massively expensive. If you think you're going to get perfection out of them, you're not. Resin casting is a whole different beast than plastic, regular hobby plastic casting such as this. This is done with a steel mold. And that's the reason you don't have as many. You have mold lines, but not like you do with resin. Resin is a liquid that's poured into a mold that is cold compared to plastic. And a lot of times it's done with a silicone mold. Yes, even Forge World does silicone molds when it comes down to your resin. Now I want to show you something what I'm talking about here. It's going to be hard to see because I've already trimmed this one up a little bit. But there was a mold line that ran here all the way up. When you get your model in, you need to kind of carefully inspect it. I think this one you can see a little bit better. Yeah, this one, if you just kind of, you see how the blade sticks right there? There's a tiny little gap. Now, that's really up to you. Personally, something like this is not going to bother me too badly because I'm going to do a scenic base. Whenever you're, speaking of scenic bases, whenever you're thinking about your scenic bases, you want this ties back into pinning, it ties back into make sure your model's stable. You want your base to tell a story. And as you're cleaning up your models, you need to be thinking about the story you want to tell with your scenic base. Maybe it's walking through a swamp where there's stumps all over the place. And yes, you could use one of those stumps to cleverly hide a connection point to your base and a pinning support. Maybe it's running across the battlefield where there's demolished tanks that could be placed just right to hide your connection point and your pins. Your pinning point, I'm sorry. There's all different ways you can do this. If you're not planning on doing a scenic base, it's going to give you a little more trouble because the legs, again, that might give you a better view of the mold line I was talking about. These legs are not ideal for pinning. So with that said, more than likely your main pinning spot is going to be underneath the model. this is the back end that kind of hooks in here like this once the spine's attached, and your connection points to your legs. Let's see here, where are you at? Will go in these little slots, like so. So you're going to have to be able to hide that pinning point. If not, you're going to have all this weight on these flimsy little legs. Now, I've seen some guys, they say they store theirs upside down, all different ways, which is fine. But again, I prefer to do a scenic base. Now, with your scenic bases, if you're playing in a place where people complain about your scenic base, well, maybe your scenic base is too big. Maybe you're playing at the wrong place. This hobby is about fun. It's about enjoying the hobby. It's not about being a power gamer. It's not about tabling everybody you run across. It's about a community of friends that should be able to sit down, share information, talk, and guide the younger members of the community. And as you can tell from my voice, I'm older. I'm in my late 40s, and I've been in this for 25 years. And again, that's what the purpose of these videos that I'll be doing. And I will try to get better and not do as much rambling, is to kind of guide some of the younger members that are watching these YouTube videos, saving up their money to buy their favorite Forge World, or whatever it may be. Could be Necrons, it could be Eldar, it could be Dark Eldar, it could be whatever. You need to have some basic hobby skills that I feel like these guys are not showing you, they're not teaching you. So I invite you to come along with me as I pin together this model. Now, that won't be in this video. This is just like I said, a run-through introduction to let you know what I plan on doing. The only thing you really need to start this is you'll need one of these. It's a drill pin, is what I've always called it. I'm sure it has another name, and somebody will correct me and say, ha ha ha, you don't know what you're talking about. Call it whatever you want. Pair of clippers, razor blades, X-Acto blades, and of course your pins. And again, the pins can be just about anything you want them to be. But again, my favorite is electric fence wire. Finishing nails you can get in a big pack at Walmart for next to nothing. And I hope you guys will forgive the rambling and will enjoy the videos as they come out. Thank you.